Today on This Week in Space, what did Wernher von Braun and Walt Disney have in common? More than you might think. Join us. It's time for the TWiT Audience Survey, the annual survey that helps us understand our audience so we can make your listening experience even better. I promise it'll only take a few minutes. Go to twit.tv/survey23. That's twit.tv/survey23 to take it. Don't wait. The last day to take the survey is January 31st. Don't drag your feet. Thanks.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 44, recorded January 13th, 2023. Mr. Von Braun's Wild Ride. This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by ACI Learning. Respected companies and government agencies around the globe turn to ACI Learning year after year to help them maintain their competitive edge. Supporting organizations across audit, IT, and cybersecurity readiness, ACI Learning keeps your team at the top of their game. Visit acilearning.com to learn more. Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Space, the Mr. Von Braun's Wild Ride edition. I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Ad Astra magazine, and as always, I'm joined by the insurpassable Tariq Malik, editor-in-chief of Space.com. How are you today, Tariq?
I'm doing well, Rod. Doing well. Just happy to be here for 2023 and Disney and Von Braun. So.
In your Blue Origin hat, turncoat. Well, today we are joined.
You're not supposed to tell anybody. Shh, shh. It's the closest hat I had here right now. So,
yeah, I believe you might know somebody that works at Boeing, but that's okay. Today we are joined, speaking of Boeing, by my friend John Rose, who is a senior director for global engineering at Boeing. John has 25 years in the aerospace business. Actually, I think more than 25 years, dating back to shuttle operations, among other things, at Rockwell International, one of my favorite companies before it was acquired by Boeing. John, you also spent 7 productive years with the Disney Corporation and park operations and show engineering, which is pretty cool. That's quite an interesting combination. Welcome today.
It is. Thank you. I appreciate the invite. It is an interesting adjacency that most people don't probably realize is out there, but yes.
So were you technically an Imagineer?
It's technically not Imagineering. It's at the parks. It's part of the engineering and facilities aspects of the park. So the day in, day out, the yearly refurbs, things along those lines. But we partnered a lot with the Imagineer. So yeah, it's technically called ride and show engineering, and it's backstage there at the parks. And we handle day-to-day issues as well as some of the, like I said, the long-term refurb activities that go on.
Well, when we're done today, after the show, I'd like to chat with you a little bit about an idea I had for making It's a Small World into a shooting gallery, but we can talk about it later.
Why not?
Okay.
Why not?
I just
Always
offended half the
ideas.
audience. I've got lots of bad ideas.
he makes sure all the rights go, Rod.
That's right.
That people can take a shot at him. So.
Well, but you can replace
generation.
the figures anyway. Yeah. If I talk about it anymore, we're going to have earwigs of you know what song in our brains.
Oh yeah.
Well, before we punch our e-ticket today, we have a joke. This one from our newest fan, Sam Bingham, who is 9 years old.
Yay.
So I want the right sound effect for this joke. Why was the astronaut feeling cold, Tariq?
I don't know, Rod. Why was the astronaut feeling cold?
Because he left his spacesuit unzipped. Wow,
that's a good one, Sam. That's
good
a good
one, Sam.
You got a laugh
keep
track.
that up. I know. We got that's new just for Sam, and we're going to be looking for his next one. So, Sam, thank you for listening to the show. We appreciate it, and I think you're officially our youngest fan. So, onward.
That's pretty cool.
And so for the rest of you slackers out there, don't be the last one to send us a new joke. Join Team Tariq for nothing but an on-air mention. Send us your bad time. And of course, please don't forget to do us a solid and make sure to like, subscribe, and all that cool podcast stuff after the show. After all, it's free. All right, let's get on to some headlines.
That's right. That's right.
Mark, I'm going to hand this off to you since you're up on all this stuff. But from space.com, we have a story on plans for replacing that poor leaky Soyuz capsule.
Yeah. This was a story that we've been watching obviously since last month when a Russian Soyuz MS-22 space capsule had that coolant leak at the station. Very dramatic with the coolant spraying out like snow in the video from the space station. What we were waiting for, because Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, said in late December that January was the month where they were going to decide what to do. Was what's the plan for the 3 astronauts, the NASA astronaut, 2 cosmonauts who are on the station right now, because they have no way off the space station if there's an emergency. And on Thursday of this week, as we're recording, Roscosmos and NASA got together and said, yes, they are in fact going to replace the Soyuz. The astronauts, they're not going to use this stricken leaky one. After all, it has zero coolant on board to keep its systems cool. I actually wrote this story. I was in the press conference with NASA and Russia. They were in Moscow doing all of the discussions. And so the plan is this. They're going to launch a new Soyuz, MS-23, on February 20th. And it's going to launch empty, which, we've not seen in recent times since I've been covering the space station. They've launched, Progress spacecraft with no crew, but always filled with cargo. They're going to launch it empty, no people aboard. It's going to have some cargo, not a lot, but they're going to try to at least use some of the space. It will go to the space station. It will dock, on the either on that day or a couple of days later. Usually it's between 1 and 3 days now, and they will then move all of the crew stuff that's in the stricken Soyuz into the new one. And the reason is this: basically, the old Soyuz, the one that has the leak, has no coolant to keep itself cool. So in the 6 hours it takes for that spacecraft to get back to Earth, it can get up to 30, 40 degrees Celsius inside the crew capsule. I looked that up. That's like 104 degrees for hours on end. It's not a safe temperature for astronauts and cosmonauts to stay at as they're trying to get back to Earth, let alone any other gear that might be sensitive to temperature, like blood samples, that kind of thing. So they're going to bring it back. They're going to land it normally in Kazakhstan, and then they're going to study it. They're going to record the temperatures all the way down so that they have a baseline for the future and they know what to expect if they see a similar situation. And then the original crew will then use this new Soyuz MS-23. Now the big thing was that this Soyuz was supposed to be the one that the next crew was going to use. So that means that crew, which was going to launch in March, is now launching sometime later, maybe months later. These astronauts, the cosmonauts and NASA astronaut Frank Rubio, will be staying on board for at least a few more months, possibly another 5 months. So they're looking at a possible year in space now for this mission while they try to figure this out. NASA, meanwhile, was going to send a new Dragon mission to the station, Crew 6, on February 16th, I think. That mission is being looked at too in terms of the timing because of all of the scheduling to bring the new Soyuz in a bit early, about a month early, and so there's going to be a ripple effect all the way down. The effects of which we're not really sure yet. But in the meantime, in the month that these astronauts don't have an escape ship, NASA says they've got a really tentative plan to secure the astronauts inside the cargo area of the Dragon that's up there now for Crew 5 if they have to ever do an emergency escape. Doesn't sound like it'll be comfortable. They could probably get one seat in there from the Soyuz if they throw out a bunch of cargo and then just strap the other guys down if they need to. But they don't want to do that, so they didn't really have a lot of details on what they would do in that case, in that scenario. But they've got a plan, which is good.
I'm going to volunteer to go up, and I can be a meat chair for any astronaut. I've got the displacement to do it. We got a lot to cover today, so if you don't mind, I'm going to skip ahead one story. The new Pentagon UFO/UAP report is here. And, yes. I don't know how long we're going to have to say UFO/UAP, but UAP is still not kind of in common nomenclature. So there you go. And just before you go, Tariq, I'll cite some numbers. Out of 510 new incidents, 366 of the 510 were considered new. 26 were ID'd as drones. 163 were ID'd as balloons or similar artifacts. 6 were identified as clutter, which basically means plastic bags flying in the upper atmosphere, which is sad in itself. And 171 remain as mysteries.
That's right. That's right. So this story came from Brett Tingley, who at space.com as our editor has covered.
Yeah, they were all space.com stories, by the way.
That's right. And but this has been a report that has fascinated the public for, basically since they announced they were going to do it like a year or so ago. And the actual release of the report has been delayed for months. So now we've got these actual numbers in place from the Defense Department. And the intent is kind of clear. They're saying they're going to watch this. They're going to look into them. NASA has their own panel that spun out of all of this. They had hearings in Congress about it. Now the 171 like unexplained, I think people are going to latch onto that a lot, but I'm sure that there's going to be other sources that they can say, is it aliens? It's probably not aliens. It's probably something else. It'd be great if it was aliens. I think it'd be fun to know about that. I think it would answer big questions, but I think it just shows that there's going to be a little bit more transparency, at least that we hope, from the military, because they have all of these cameras, these advanced new flying gear, and hopefully we'll get at least a new glimpse. Now, if there's anything classified in there, if these are actually like new aircraft or drones or whatnot, we're probably not going to get much, and that conspiracy could continue.
Well, that conspiracy theory could continue. There's no
theory. Yes, theory that we know of. Where's my
and of course, there's always the solid possibility that they are Chinese or perhaps Russian observation tactics. And John, did you have something to say about this? I heard you.
I just think it's a fascinating area. You go back all the way to Project Blue Book and everything else that's been out there. It continues to be a point of just fascination by everybody, whether they're just a casual observer of it. But then you look at the video that the Navy put out. They released that, and it showed even the pilots are like, "What the heck is that?" So it's just an area that just continues to be fascinating. Like you said, Rod, does it mean that we're dealing with Chinese or Russians or something else? I don't know. Anybody that you don't have to be an aerospace industry person to just say, sometimes go look at it and go, what the heck is that? So
yeah.
And I'll point out, you mentioned UAPs earlier, Rod, and I think it is getting a lot more traction these days just because it's a fun new acronym. It was in the movie Nope, that hit movie last year, where they talk about UAPs. And in fact, my cat house, I have like this cardboard, cat fun house for our two cats. And it's a catstronaut house that we got from Target. And
okay, you're starting to embarrass us here. Come on.
It says it's a UAP observation dome. And so,
oh wow.
Okay.
Rod just gave me. It says that on the package. So
okay, Tariq, you just pour some cold water on it. I just want to make a point which I've made before, and this is just my opinion. But if the UAP thing is real in terms of being extraterrestrial origin, these critters have been observing our military ability for 70 years. And if you have the technology to cross dozens or hundreds or thousands of light years of space, and you arrive and see this species that can't even make an aircraft carry or levitate out of the ocean, for God's sakes, I think you'd be pretty over it by now. So I have to say, in reading the prior reports to this, the conclusion that, if you're a foreign actor of indeterminate origin and you have access to some sophisticated drone technology, which some Asian powers we know might, and you want to see what a carrier task force is capable of doing in terms of electronic warfare, you pop up out of the water or drop out of the upper atmosphere, and you shadow the task force and they start banging away with radar and everything else. And you go, oh, that's how it works. Okay, thanks. And off you go. But, I'm no expert. So before we move on to our main topic, let's take a moment to thank one of our sponsors. This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by ACI Learning. ACI Learning offers fully customizable training for your team and formats for all types of learners in audit, cybersecurity, and IT. Our partners at IT Pro, formerly IT Pro TV, recently became a part of ACI Learning's family. Many respected companies and government agencies around the globe continue to turn to ACI Learning year after year to help maintain a competitive edge. ACI Learning's unique video platform hosts a library of engaging, conversational, and convenient on-demand video learning. You can explore everything ACI Learning has to offer and build your organization's protection and readiness with IT Pro, team training for CompTIA, Microsoft IT training, Cisco training, Linux training, Apple training, security cloud, and more. Audit Pro, courses are built in alignment with the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy Standards, the gold standard in audit programming. Also, Enterprise Solutions webinars and the Skeptical Auditor podcast. You have practice labs. Ensure your personnel have the opportunity to test and experiment before deploying new apps or updates without compromising your live system. Get a broad range of IT topics covering fundamental, intermediate, and advanced levels for all your employees. It includes live hardware, not simulations, rapid learning tool interoperability, LTI integrations, standardized reporting and evaluations, vendor agnostic platform, localization, or customization options. Learning hubs take advantage of one-on-one support from an instructor at one of their 5 hub locations, as well as quizzes, virtual labs, study games, videos, practice exams, and more as you prepare. And ACI Learning will cover the cost of your first exam voucher. ACI Learning supports organizations across audit, IT, and cybersecurity protection and readiness. Maintain your company's competitive edge with ACI Learning and visit acilearning.com. That's acilearning.com. Okay, let's move on, shall we? So I have a little disclaimer here because this episode is about Wernher von Braun and Walt Disney, and I don't need to give a disclaimer about Walt Disney, but I need to say something about Wernher von Braun, and I'll be very candid. Wernher von Braun was at one time a Nazi and was an SS officer. As far as we know, that was done for political expedience, not because he was a believer, but nonetheless, the photos are there. He was recruited when he was young by the Nazis to work on rocket weapon development. And according to a number of sources, was aware of impressed slave labor and extreme human rights abuses, including executions, possibly, at his V2 production plant in the second half of World War II. Not to mention, of course, fielding those weapons of mass destruction. So there is some baggage following Dr. von Braun. I don't want to minimize it. To quote him after a V2 impacted in England early in the program, the rocket worked perfectly. It just landed on the wrong planet. So this led the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who was looking into him shortly around the time of Operation Paperclip after World War II. And I'm paraphrasing, but they said, we conclude that Dr. von Braun is simply amoral. Now, I think we can modify that a bit, although this has all been well documented, particularly in Michael Neufeld's biography about von Braun called Von Braun, Dreamer, Space Engineer of War, which you should check out. But after coming to the United States and eventually becoming a citizen, von Braun appears to have gained not only some sense of moral conscience, as if he didn't have one before, he certainly much more, also became an increasing believer in Christianity, got active in his community, and kind of in an interesting twist, emerged as one of the strongest advocates of civil rights in the NASA Field Center structure, at least in terms of their public front. So we'll let you be the judge, but I think these things are important to talk about. Bottom line is von Braun was a complex individual, like so many of us, and he was not free from sin. He was also really an engineer, a savvy politico, and a person without whom it's unlikely would have made it to the moon by 1969. So there you go. That's what I have to say about that. Tariq, you have anything to add, or shall we move on?
No, I mean, I think you pretty much covered it all. You know, there is a lot of baggage, as you said, that comes with von Braun that was glossed over intentionally because of the Cold War and the push to beat the Soviets to the moon and whatnot. And you know, there was a big rush with Operation Paperclip to get all of the engineers, you know, from Germany over to the U.S., you know, to do that, to kind of hone in on that technology there. And this is the baggage that came with that, you know, and so it's good that we kind of start with that, because from that came a human spaceflight program that we've seen play out during the space race and up until now too. And then what we're going to talk about today, this kind of synergy. Yes. Of bringing that to the public in a way. So let's start there. So let's move to the important part. John, tell us about a little bit about your background and how that got you interested in the connective tissue between Wernher von Braun and Walt Disney, because that is not an area I've looked. It's an area that's been studied a little bit, but not much. Right. There isn't much out there.
There's not, and it's an area that came about from, like you said, you know, I've worked on the space shuttle at Rockwell, the ISS, at Boeing. Now I've worked on the CST-100 and other things like that in my career. And in addition to that, I did work at Disney, as you said, right? So I worked in the park on the attractions, I worked in operations, and I worked as an engineer. And And those two areas, those two industries, also the historical aspect of them is something that's always fascinated me. I've always been an aviation historian, kind of buff and those things. And then also what has, as Disney as a company, it's 100 years old now. Boeing is over 100 years as well. They're both fascinating perspectives of American culture, American technology, American innovation, depending upon how you look at it. And the fact that I landed in those two roles, one as an engineer at Disney and one as an engineer in the aerospace industry, actually have a nexus around back in the 50s when Walt is creating this new entertainment venue of a theme park versus kind of the pop-up attractions of, merry-go-rounds and things like that. And at the same time, von Braun is there setting the stage for what we're going to do, going to the moon and beyond. And that they actually cross paths. It was the realization that when Disney talked about a Tomorrowland, it wasn't about, as he at times he said, "Oh, right, right now space is Buck Rogers. It's that fantastical kind of, floating around with a bubble helmet and everything else." But the reality of what Walt brought to it was he wanted a real Tomorrowland. He wanted to understand what the reality of the possibilities were. And so that just happened to overlap in the fact that they kind of came together, they did some stuff together, and they went their separate ways. But in a lot of ways, they were also very similar individuals in terms of their personalities, their drive, their motivation, their energy and passion. And so it was just such a crazy point for things to converge around two kind of very different, aspects of really defining components of that time period in U.S. history and our culture. So that's kind of what got me interested. And like I said, history in general has always been something that's fascinated me.
So let me just make sure I've got my timeline right. If I understand correctly, while Walt was beginning to figure out, so here's Disneyland, we've got Fantasyland, Adventureland, Frontierland, and we got to have this thing for the future.
Right.
So as you said, he was kind of shying away from the whole Buck Rogers, ray guns, tight spacesuits thing, which is good. But he had figured everything out as I read it, and was really a little vexed over, okay, how do we move forward with this? Because the idea of human spaceflight was pretty new. So just about that time, coincidentally and fortuitously, Collier's magazine brings out this incredible series of articles that are co-authored by Wernher von Braun, Willy Ley, illustrated by the incredible artist Chesley Bonestell, the first big aerospace artist and so forth. So if I understand correctly, Walt saw that, dispatched Ward Kimball and some other people and said, okay, work us up a TV show. And was somewhere in there, did the plans for Tomorrowland begin to gel?
Yeah. So the Collier articles, like you said, they were like, I think 52 to 54. There was a series, I think 8 of them. And it was not only, von Braun did a few of them, but then it was also early days of space medicine. How do you survive in space? What's it going to be like? So there was a lot, they covered a lot of broad parts of it. And von Braun did a few of them. And you're right. They were at the time, the whole concept around that whole weekly show that Disney did was around fundraising for his park. He was trying to, he did a show with ABC, and the whole idea was he's also get sponsorship, and it was also promo for what the park was going to be. And so, the park opened in July of, I know. Yeah. That's where there's these whole different aspects of where Walt's brain was. He was, he was the consummate inventor, but he was also a businessman, and, and Roy as well. But, he looked at it from the standpoint of, well, I got Frontierland, that I know what that is. Fantasyland, like you said, a lot of it was based on products that were a part of the fairy tales and things like that. But when he thought about Tomorrowland, he didn't want to do Buck Rogers. He didn't want science fiction. He wanted what he called science factual. And so the whole idea was, I want to show what this really potentially could look like, House of the Future, all those things that he did, were based on, he wanted to present to people really where we could be going. And so he found the authoritative voice on it. He had Ward Kimball talk to him. And if you look at what they put together around those 3 different movies, which garnered great interest from the public, was as much of a crash course kind of in the reality of what we thought we could do, how we would do it, and even what things would look like. His 4-stage rocket that he did was not a Estes model. It was something that he had put together and said, this is how it could look to go do, to the moon and beyond. And so the fact that as von Braun was hitting his stride for messaging around the space program and where it could go, and that Disney's looking for, like, how do I show people really where we could be? It was just the perfect timing. And Ward Kimball talked to him. Disney had the best model makers and painters and everybody else. They put a real face to what was in von Braun's head. And I mean, that's, the images that he had of what this could look like and how it would happen, they brought to life in movies and in posters and attractions. People were able to experience the best that they could, which was so new for everybody. And it just fed that desire of back to the exploration days of where can we go next? And, that kind of, that whole inspirational part of what it means to be an explorer was just, in so many ways, it was just the perfect timing for those two to come together.
It's funny, John, that you mentioned this, because I saw the exact, this special that came out of all of this with von Braun and Walt Disney on the Wonderful World of Disney in like the 80s. That's like 30 years later, and it was still futuristic to me. And then, when I was a little kid, then you go to Disneyland and you see the big Saturn V kind of ish rocket that you can then get on with my dad, and you go around in a circle and you almost throw up.
Oh, the spin around.
Amazing. Yeah. It's a lot different now when I took my daughter on it, but there's that feeling that you get when watching these shows. I actually have a tin copy of the special here at the house that we've watched a few times. So it's weird that it sounds like, it went from this not having an idea for what Tomorrowland would be to finding the synergy to creating something that not only fit that time, but it's something that has persisted over time and becoming a bit of an icon of itself. If I'm not reading that wrong. So
no, absolutely. I mean, if you look at what's happened with Tomorrowland, the intent was that it would continually evolve to say, where can we get to, right? So things have been replaced. There's Star Tours. There's different things that are now in some ways more tied to aspects of, movies and things along those lines. But, the whole idea of still stepping into a futuristic aspect of things, whether it's like you were talking before, Rod, about, the immersive aspect of the music and and I know we're talking, you think about Tomorrowland and von Braun, but, that's part of also the whole evolution of what the theme park industry has come, this immersive experience. Like, you actually feel like you're in Batuu when you go to Star Wars Land at Disneyland, so it's grown into even a more experiential than just, oh, I'm looking at a model of a rocket or whatever, but it's like in some ways feeling you're there. So the whole, it has continued to grow and change, and it's great to see that, there is still a acknowledgement by companies like Disney and others that respect where we've been, the history, what it meant, what it was intending to do at the time of von Braun trying to push the boundaries and everything, and they incorporated it, and it didn't become kind of kitschy. It wasn't some knockoff, just, I mean, they had, the early days, they had the astronauts there, when they were launching Tomorrowland, they brought in Carpenter and others, and then they had the guy with the jetpack. It was not meant to be something that was cheesy. It was really to pay respect and acknowledge what this meant for not only us as a human race, but also as a country. I mean, it was really talking about things that we could do. And that's why you got, TWA was there, and McDonnell Douglas, Douglas Aircraft, all these icons of the industry. They realized also what it was doing was the PR component, but it was also a chance for them to really highlight contributions and benefits that these kinds of activities brought to the public that most times people didn't, beyond Tang, which I know you love to talk about, Rod, and
I hate talking about Tang. You heard me with Handle the other day, right?
Oh yes, I did.
You're old enough to remember.
I mean, it was somewhat of a, it fed a lot, it met a lot of the intents of what both of them were trying to do in terms of, in some ways, legitimizing some of these aspects that some people just didn't even understand or appreciate.
Well, I wanted to follow up on. Oh, go ahead, Rod.
Well, just going to say, to your point, about legitimizing it. it's interesting to me, kind of ironic that Tomorrowland has moved, and it's following popular culture, I guess, but it's moved from those early days of science, big science,
Yes,
to more science fiction. I must tell a short story here. When I was about 7 years old, we went to Disneyland, and if I recall correctly, we have a Kodachrome slide from that trip. The top of the Matterhorn was still being finished. It didn't actually have the snow and the concrete over it. Anyway, so I'm a little kid in faded Kodachrome. This is in the early 60s. And we're walking around Tomorrowland, and it's twilight. We come around the corner, and I see the TWA Moonliner, which was this beautiful white with red accent stripes rocket. I think it was about 80 feet tall, sitting on 3 landing legs. Just magnificent, spotlit against a lavender sky. And I looked up with tears in my young eyes. And I was already space struck, but this was like this incredible moment of discovery. And I looked up at my father towering over me, who was holding my hand loosely, and said, "Dad, is it real?" And he looked down and said, "Nah." Got a crush, but that's the way it goes. He probably wasn't that mean about it, but it felt like it. It's like, oh, he destroyed my world. But that was a fantastic. So there's a small version of it, I guess, still sitting over the Space Pizza Parlor, whatever it is.
Yep.
But that beautiful, I know they got to move forward, so forth. I wish that was still there. But before I dwell on that too long, let me move on to the attraction, the Ride to the Moon.
Yes.
Which was very well put together. And as I understand it, not just the overall design of Tomorrowland, but I think von Braun and team also collaborated on the ride.
Yep.
Which you'd go inside, and the seats had little pneumatic balloons in them that pushed you up and down, supposed to simulate accelerating a rocket and all that. The coolest part was you're looking up or down at these circular view screens, and they're showing footage from one of the Disney specials that was live action, that was very lavish with great special effects, not quite 2001: A Space Odyssey, but you didn't see the strings, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And my favorite part of the whole thing is the rocket, with the lantern-jawed military guys flying at, rocket ship XR-1, whatever it is flying behind the moon, and the sun's down on the backside of the moon when they're passing it. So they're dropping flares so we can see what's down below. When they fire the third flare in this flickering brief light, there's a little set of ruins down on the moon. Clearly, these old, weirdly eroded ruins, of course, since there's no weather. And so you see that, and they cut to a picture of the 3 guys, who are manning that part of the spaceship, and they kind of look at each other and give this manly nod, and then they don't tell mission control as they come up the other side. It's like, wait, what? So I remember thinking that was quite extraordinary. Anyway, I've taken up too much time.
No,
but if you could talk about that connection a bit, that'd be great.
Those are great aspects of it. I mean, because like you said, that's what you remember. You remember the rocket. You remember that kind of experience, and that's where when you think about what kind of a vehicle, something like a theme park engagement is for aspects of this, you felt like you were kind of in that rocket, right? I mean, it is so much more and lets you appreciate things better. And I mean, there's the whole entrance when you're walking past the control center and all that stuff, and the guy that's in there telling you about what they're monitoring, the telemetry and everything. It's meant to be educational as much as it is exciting, right? Or a chance to ride a ride. And so weaving that message together is what, and I say this from being a big advocate of Disney and having worked there, is that the Imagineers and the company do a great job of storytelling, right? And it's storytelling that also involves the educational and the reality component of things to highlight what's really going on. So you walk in and there's that guy that has his own following. His name's Tom Morrow. Tomorrow. That's what his name is. It's Tom Morrow. Yeah. And so, but it's those play on words. It's those weaving in funny aspects that let people remember things as well as take away a little bit of knowledge, right? When you remember when they do when you're sitting there and around the circular watching it, and they talk about what's going to happen, you're going to feel yourself sinking into the seats. There's an educational experience that goes along with all of this, which is why it's so great, that they still today pay homage to some of the things that came out of the von Braun days and early parts of it in the movies and things like that. I sent you that picture. If you look at von Braun standing next to his 4-stage rocket, and the rocket that's in The Incredibles, you can see that they're kind of referencing back to where things came from. It's a reflection of the history and the legacy of the company, and also of what built it. And it's about Disney, but it's also about where did we as a civilization, however you want to look at it, where we've come in that evolution as well. And so, let's not forget our past. It doesn't mean we can't stop the progress going forward, but let's pay homage to where we've been as well. So I love that they continue to evolve, and I'll share a little bit. So when I was working at the park, there's always this nostalgia part of it that people are like, oh, don't change this, don't change that. It's that finding that balance between acknowledging where we've been, but the fact that things continue to change and move forward, and how do you find that kind of balance? But, there's a lot of emotion and passion that comes into those things when something that's as impactful as your experience at Disneyland or whatever. And like you said, you still remember it now, but it's storytelling. It's quintessential storytelling that's got a thread of education in there. And I mean, that's Disney. Yeah, it was a business to make money, of course, but he wanted the experience. He wanted people to experience what formed the country, where the country could go, where we could go as a people. He purposely wanted an educational aspect of it. And that's why he said, the parks will never be done. They'll continue to evolve. And so, but it's so nice and refreshing to see that component of just trying to educate people about things slowly on the slide, just weaving little things in there, because it's different now than it was in the 50s and 60s when people, they used to dress up to fly in airplanes. It's changed. But so you still got to kind of remind people of where we've been and where we can go. So I appreciate that about them.
Yeah. And even Space Mountain, which has been an icon of Tomorrowland for decades, obviously, had a cameo in that new Lightyear movie where the space launch site evolves into the Space Mountain. When I first saw Space Mountain, I was just amazed that there was a mountain all of space and you could go in and ride around, and it was amazing inside. But you mentioned that
you're so easily impressed.
You just got to put space in front of everything, and I'm there.
Actually, I think the coolest part of Space Mountain, I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump your question, but the roller coaster was fine, but that spaceport going into it was what got my blood going.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because I had this moment of, oh, you're actually feeling like you're going. It's the only chance I'll have to go to space. Okay. I'm sorry, Tariq.
Well, you mentioned the era that this meeting, with von Braun and his colleagues also, had with the Walt Disney and company and the impact of the Collier's magazine series on everything. And I was curious about kind of I don't know if it's not the era, but like the feeling of adventure at that time, right? Because these are two men from very different backgrounds, and one, I guess you could say, is pushing the frontier of imagination. That's obviously Walt Disney, and then you've got von Braun really trying to push a human spaceflight program in the United States, and I'm wondering about where what was the, I don't know, the connective tissue, that linking spirit between them. Is it that optimism? Is it that kind of frontier-ish in the American dream kind of at that time that was really making it like a meeting of the minds that came together for this?
There's a couple things. I mean, because I've read there's some really good biographies on both of them, right? And then you have to understand the cultural component of it. You think about not even a decade before, like when the Colliers came out, in the early 50s. I mean, we're not even a decade away from World War II. There was that whole everything that happened there, and just the mountain of emotion and everything that happened as a result of that. I mean, now we're talking, atomic weapon. I mean, there's a lot that came out of that. And so this idea that from that, we're going to take everything that we fought for and everything that we sacrificed, and we're going to continue to move forward the potential of what we can do now. I mean, you're talking about, the TVs becoming more commonplace. So it was just the mass media. It was that emotional aspect of, we can do so much after everything, all the atrocities that came out of World War II and what we learned from it, it's like, we've got to be able to do better than that, And so, von Braun saw an opportunity to take what he was doing, unfortunately for military purposes for Germany, and have that civilian application, right? I mean, so he wanted to do that, and Disney wanted to push the boundaries of where theme parks were and everything. So I think the culture and the society and the public just wanted something more that they could enjoy as well. And this, they were loving science fiction at the time. So from that standpoint, it was just a way to take it to another level. But I mean, I think people were really craving something that was a shot in the arm of, like you said, almost like the original settlers exploring because Disney was all about, he was an explorer as well. He wanted to push boundaries on technology, on innovation. He was really about that, as the same as von Braun. And so, they capitalized on that kind of feeling within the public of yeah, we can do some really good things now, and what's out there, what can we do? So it was. The same as the two of them meeting at the right time. I think society was really looking for that positive reinforcement after some really tough times, not even a decade ago.
So I think there's something really interesting in that, which is, here's von Braun and Disney, who both pretty clearly believe that technology will lead us to a brighter future. Right. And you see von Braun in these films talking about all the great things that can happen once we get into space. And obviously Disney was a believer in that. And this kind of consciously designed connection between Frontierland leading into Tomorrowland. American could still do it. We're still bold individualists and all that. But at the same time, so we think of von Braun in the context of World War II and the Apollo program. But at the time that he was working with Disney on the shows and designing Tomorrowland, he was actually working on the government side for the Army, yes, as I recall, designing reentry nose cones for ICBMs. And then just a few years later would be drafting the report for Project Horizon, which was to be a U.S. Army base on the moon that had nuclear lunar claymore mines, nuclear bazookas, and handheld weapons to defend against the Reds if they were coming over a hill, because nobody liked communists at that point, especially von Braun. And I think somewhere in there even discussing the possibility of firing nukes from the moon, because von Braun was a true patriot for the United States at this point. Right. But it's an interesting kind of tension with what he was doing with Disney, isn't it?
It is. And that's why this is not a simple black and white kind of engagement, right? Because to your point, both, I don't want to say they had ulterior motives, but they also certainly had different things that they were trying to accomplish, right? They partnered from the standpoint of Disney was looking at it as an opportunity to improve his product, right? I mean, they both were altruistic in some sense of, von Braun, while he was making weapons and making V2s for the Germans, also was trying to just do more in advanced rocketry, period, right? I mean, he didn't want to do it to make weapons, but that's kind of how it came about. And, so they both worked to get from each other also things that would help in their respective areas, right? Von Braun worked with Disney because then he could publicize what he thought we needed to do from a rocket perspective or technology perspective. And Disney worked with von Braun to get his, recognition as the preeminent rocket scientist to say, here's who helped design my park and the rides, So they both knew that there was that marketing component of it that they both could benefit from. But and so this is where it gets a little dicier in terms of, again, this was not all about altruistic ideas of we can make life better. It's like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours as well, kind of a thing that went on in some ways. But that is the reality. Also, there's lots of great books, Selling the Moon. It's like there's all these ones that are out there talking about a lot of these things. You just have to convince people and talk to them, and I think that's where they met up from that standpoint. They really did bring both novel, innovative, creative, push the envelope ideas. And they had a partnership for that. The time that it was going on really helped both of them. And so you do have to look at these kinds of things through multiple lenses. That's true. It is a more of a gray than a black and white as to why these things happened sometimes.
So I've asked you this question before, but not for about 8 years, I think. So I have to ask it again. So I've always wondered if there was a third back being scratched in this, it occurs to me with no evidence whatsoever that this was about the time that the U.S. government might have been realizing, we need to clean up this guy to the public a little bit because he's going to be critical to our future space efforts.
Yeah.
Is there any chance, or have you seen any evidence that the government might have been involved in the Disney Von Braun connection a little bit to say, can you whitewash this guy a bit for us?
I haven't seen anything that directly says they put them together. I mean, if you read the way that this all happened was, hey, we need someone that can help us with this. I just read this article. If you talk about, but then again, I'm sure that anybody related to Von Braun was not upset that this kind of a thing happened when you look at what Disney was epitomizing in terms of family entertainment and everything else. And you're right. I mean, Von Braun also, he was a good speaker. He was a good presenter. He was captivating in how he did things, and so
God, yeah.
it was, if it wasn't done by the government trying to help do it, I'm sure they were more than happy that it happened. But you're right, the FBI files and things that were done on Von Braun, and it's another area because Paperclip and everything that happened with that Project Paperclip was when people started to peel back the layers on this. You have people in government and military that are happy that they came over, and then you're like, but these are the guys that are responsible for what? And so it is an area that you have to be careful. And like you said, you have to acknowledge how this all came about from where Von Braun comes from. Again, it's not all altruism. It's from this fact that he was creating weapons of war. And so you can never lose sight of that. As much as you want to say, oh my gosh, he helped shape, what Tomorrowland looks like, that's great. But where did it start from? It was from a person that was, engineering weapons of war. So it is a sobering aspect of it. And whether it's other parts of our history and our culture, you can't lose sight of that. And so, maybe part of that is why I was interested in this, is that this again is, it's not just a black and white topic. When you talk about how Disneyland evolved, it's like, there's parts of our history that are very difficult that we have to contend with and deal with, whether it's about, theme parks or whatever it may be, and some of the people involved with these. It's a necessary part of it, because I don't think we want to lose context of where some of these things came from.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. There is it's the bringing the authenticness of the spaceflight kind of vision that Von Braun had to a public that would see it through, I don't know, like a Disney filter or whatnot. There's I'm sure that there were a lot of discussions between what the realism versus the aesthetics aspect would have to go through, not just, for what we saw eventually in Tomorrowland, but for the TV, presentations itself. There's a scene from that special where there's a guy in like an ice cream cone vehicle, where it's just like, it's just him by himself. It's got little arms and that he can use to manipulate stuff. And the reason I bring it up is because to me, that was like the best part of that entire thing, is that people could go out and they're on their own and go in space in the far future. And Von Braun was talking about how they would use it to do maintenance and repair. And a few years ago, actually just recently, there's plans for this private space station. And one of the things they're going to do is have this private like spacewalk experience in this little ice cream cone shaped thing where they go out and it has the arms and it's straight from this special. And it was just like this weird moment that came to me where it's like, you've got the realism aspect that I thought was fantasy back in the 80s when I saw it on TV. And yet here we are now, where it's real again. And I'm curious what the trade-offs were that you read about or that you were following, about, no, we can't do that, but it has to have wings, right? Because it has to be reusable or whatnot.
Right.
So
there is an when you think about what Disney's trying to do and deliver through its engagements, whether it's through the TV shows or the movies or whatever, it's, convey a sense that people can relate, or they can appreciate it, or they can acknowledge it and recognize. And so, there's a limit to what you can teach people through some of these things, but the idea that you're conveying a sense of reality, especially when you're trying to get them to have that little bit of knowledge that maybe they weren't expecting to get as a result of going on a ride at Disneyland, you've got to temper that with the fact that they're there for a ride as well, so there's things, and then the other part of this is, and this is where the Imagineers that create these kind of engagements and things are just incredible, right? Because there's a storytelling aspect to it. There's an experiential from the standpoint of, what they're going through in the queue out in front and everything else. And how's the, the engagement with the ride, whether it's video or a ride vehicle or something like that. And then there's the whole idea that this thing still has to be safe, that's for someone to go on a ride. So it's blending all these things together and finding that nuance and that balance of, what can we do? How can we show it? How can we convey it? Is just incredible to think that this was also the stuff that they were doing back in the 50s and that people walked away loving it and not realizing that they actually learned something as a result of it as well. But to your point also about kind of, if you think what von Braun was talking about in the early 50s and the fact that some of those things are starting to come to fruition now and actually, becoming a reality is just amazing. I mean, we all wish that technology would maybe sometimes go faster, but eventually, these things that'll never happen. And that's where we are, but, flyback boosters, things that he talked about, other things, they're a part of the reality now that of the way that we look at things. And he pushed the envelope on space operations and, in orbit refueling, all sorts of things that we again are talking about as we really now maybe the technology meets the ingenuity and imagination that von Braun had 70 years ago about how to do this. Maybe the timing now is right, but it is fascinating that when you find that the technology and the passion and the insight maybe are all starting to coalesce around a point where we can maybe make some of these things happen.
So I wanted to mention something that I've found really fascinating that I came to understand better, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. I was writing something about von Braun and doing some research in the glorious age of the internet, as opposed to when I did my university education, when we were still pulling out long drawers of file cards at the library. And there's this wonderful picture of von Braun at Huntsville, standing on a podium, having just given a speech, looking down at George Wallace, of all people, the very racist governor of Alabama. And so I thought, well, this is curious because von Braun's got this kind of wicked smirk on his face, and Wallace is looking very unhappy. And I thought, oh, there's got to be a story here. So the story is that in 1961, President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, said, hey, NASA, you got to desegregate your workforce. And as I understand it, some of the field centers move faster than others. A couple dragged their feet a little more than they should have. Von Braun, despite his very checkered history, perhaps as part of his moral and religious conversion as a new U.S. citizen, was the first to step up and tell his people in Huntsville, you desegregate or you're going to be gone. And he was very aggressive about bringing in minorities, especially African-American people. And so that shot of him and Wallace was, he had been giving a speech, I think it was, and Wallace came in later in the event and said, hey, you can't do this. We can't have this kind of thing in the state of Alabama. And von Braun basically said, I'm federal government. I'm doing the right thing, regardless of what you say, and get the hell out of my facility, which I thought was pretty cool. And it just shows the complexity of the man. And also he made a short film, and he was a very telegenic, very convincing, kind of old world baronial, but just so engaging speaker, enough to pull Congress along with Apollo, I think is why NASA likely chose him to make this short film for internal use on why it's time to desegregate. And he gave a really compelling case.
Yeah, he's a, like you said, he's a fascinating character, and I don't want to gloss over or minimize it. I mean, he's somewhat a victim of circumstances of when he grew up and what was going on and everything else as to how we view him in some regards, right? So, but you're right. I think, especially in his later years, because the biography of him talks about it. I mean, he had somewhat of an epiphany and a coming to, I don't want to say coming to Jesus moment, but in some ways it was literally a come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, it really was.
About what it means to make this place a better place for everybody, not only from the standpoint of what science and technology can bring, but to us as we relate to each other as just humans, and I think he did as much as he pushed the boundaries of technology through his intellect. I think he tried to push social norms and social boundaries that were there as well, realizing that this isn't all just about let's make a rocket that goes faster. It's about making this a better place in general for things that go on. He was also, he was a big advocate of people when it came to giving them opportunities, to growing them and developing them, to pushing, people to find in themselves that they could do more. The same as Disney did in a lot of ways, which is why the two of them are very similar from the standpoint of their passion and their desire and their motivation around why they did some of their things was they just wanted things to be better for people, and that's where I think von Braun, when you look at the later years, I think that's really more of who he was as a person. And you see what he did, not only in terms of pushing us, getting us off our seat from where we were from a space program and what we thought we could do, but even from a societal and a cultural standpoint. And I think the two of them are more similar in some ways than dissimilar. And so it is great also that you hear those kinds of things where you can look at von Braun and go, that's probably more who he was than kind of this, what he came out of Germany and World War II with this image of him. And part of it, we're in a state now here in 2023 where if you said Wernher von Braun, I don't know how many people would know who he is, is the other part of this. It's like we lose perspective and we can't do that. And that's why I think it's important that we acknowledge where we are, where we're going, but also keep that our one perspective of the past as well. And von Braun, it's a messy time. You look at what was going on a world stage. You look at what just a decade later in terms of the U.S. and civil rights and everything else. It is a messy set of times that things are in flux and trying to make figuring out exactly who stood where and kind of what drove maybe their rationale for things is a tough thing. And it's especially looking back on it to understand what they were going through. It's hard, but I think we need to acknowledge and appreciate it as well.
You mentioned, John, that Tomorrowland was designed to be a place that was like always evolving to kind of push where the future was going to be. And I recall Rod was talking about going on a mission to the moon, and I recall going on a mission to Mars when I got in the same ride with the seats changing and everything. Still waiting for that to happen in real life too. And when I took my daughter when she was 5 to Tomorrowland, I was struck by the fact that the shiny white and red rocket that felt like getting on a Saturn V is now it's this clockwork bronze and copper type of a rocket. Still a lot of fun, but it's a different experience now. And I'm curious how much of that von Braun Disney partnership that we saw in that special in these discussions is still there for people to go see today. And are the models around anywhere where people can go check them out too?
So there is the in Tomorrowland now they do have, like Rod was talking about at Pizza Port, they've redone it so it is the white and red rocket. It's a newer version of it, more in line with like the Toy Story approach to it. But I would say if you think of so that's really where things started, right? So Disneyland was the original park, built in 55. It had a very strong SoCal engagement with aerospace, which is why, Douglas was there, TWA. There's a lot of connectivity to the local the local area and what was done as a result of that really being his test bed for things. As the parks have grown, there's been, I think there's a thread of not only there's still some aspects of von Braun, but I think if you go to Paris, there's a whole Jules Verne thread that's woven through there, Tomorrowland, and it's moved a little bit. I'll say maybe from where it started, which at the time was von Braun, and it was Disneyland. As Disney has become, the global presence that it is an acknowledgement of the pioneers no matter where they are or when they were and what they pushed. I mean, look at the Nautilus that was, the submarines in Tomorrowland. I mean, it's amazing that they look like they do versus some little kitschy little throw a glass submarine together and we'll put it in the water or whatever. It was intended to be an acknowledgement of really what happened, going under the polar caps and things. So yeah. I think the company has evolved, but it is so not only what Disney did to make the Disney experience successful, which was, and this is what I was talking to Rod about, was the fact that both of these guys were working. There was no playbook to work from, right? They had to kind of figure this out as they went along, and both of them were of the mindset of like, all right, let's try some. If it doesn't work, we'll try something different. And they both pushed those boundaries to establish in some ways what has been, those are the shoulders that people now stand on when we talk about, the next step in evolution. But, the company still acknowledges and pays homage to it. Like I said, there's, if you look at some of the animated movies like The Incredibles, or you look at Don Hahn, who's one of the premier people within Disney, he's got a whole thing on the technology of Disney. I mean, it is still a part of the company that they acknowledge, that they embrace. And the storytelling, I think now with maybe some of the shift back to in some of the leadership at Disney, I think you'll see more of the storytelling is grounded in that kind of approach of where the company came from, and acknowledging what it means to be rooted in reality in some sense, and the fantasy that I think really got everybody into on the Disney train in the first place. So I'm cautiously optimistic that I think you will always see some sort of recognition of where Disney started, and especially the Von Braun part. Whether it's in animated movies or in the parks, or I mean, hey, look, they did the Black Hole. They did all sorts of great stuff to talk about. My favorite
Disney movie, The Black Hole. So, Rod knows this.
Rod's getting indigestion. So I'd like to close with a little bit of discussion about the legacy of this. I don't think either Disney or Von Braun would have ever seriously considered that in the early 21st century, big space flight would resemble 1950s science fiction movies as it did what they were doing, which was the national program at the time,
right?
Where the rich guy says, "I'm going to the moon," which is the stock of the awful sci-fi movies I grew up watching in Saturday matinees. But I also want to extend this point to, when I look at what Disney and Von Braun created and how that sort of crept into the national mindset about space, and it was transformational, it strikes me that this looks a lot like what China is doing right now with their space efforts, because they have not just come out with this very clear national agenda of, look, we're going to be a world beater in space, watch us go, but they've also very carefully crafted their past mythos into this with, by naming the lunar probes Chang'e after, the Jade Goddess on the moon and the White Rabbit and all that. But beyond that, their history and their culture is woven in the naming and the branding of their program. And I wonder if some of that was by looking at what had been done in the U.S. back in the 50s.
Well, I would say probably so. But I mean, and we actually just ironically been talking about this topic in a related meeting that I was just at, and that the Chinese are very connected with their history, the 5,000 years of history or so that they have, whatever. What happened in the past defines them now and where they're going to go, so for them, that is a big part of being connected with their history. For us, our country being only a couple hundred years old and being a country of immigrants, we look at things differently in some ways as to what does it mean from what our ancestors kind of did. And I agree. I mean, there's a component of all of this that's meant to pull on the heartstrings, make it emotional. It's just it's a component of just that cultural kind of what resonates and what are people looking for to be able to kind of aspire to, and what motivates them and drives them and inspires. So it is a fascinating thinking, to think about that and how all these areas overlap with each other. So the Chinese know how to do that probably better than anybody. So.
And I would just point out that Yeah, there is a Mars Colony amusement park or Mars Base amusement park that they opened a few years back. They built a McDonald's into a Long March booster for a promo at one point in time, and there's a lot of synergies between that and bringing space down to Earth at Disneyland with Tomorrowland and Von Braun.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, John, this has been really incredible. Is there anything coming up soon in your docket in terms of talks or books or further studies you're going to be doing with this?
Well, I am, and I know you and I, Rod, when we first met, what was it, 2016, we started talking about this. I am still getting on. I'm finishing up the draft of that book that really kind of was the nexus for this, and that pitch that I did, the presentation where you and I met around. And so I do think this is the kind of a thing that deserves some light for people to realize. And I think it's a topic that's interesting, at least to me, and I think to the two of you, it sounds like. But it's something that I think is could fill in that gap, like you said, of, hey, I never knew that happened. So I am working on this. And then one other book that I've got an idea for, again, a historical part, but kind of the early days of Disney and some of the aspects that went on there. It's amazing if you look at the people that made Disneyland happen for Walt. It was such a unique set of people that they brought together, admirals, all sorts of people that you never would have thought would have been the right people, but they brought the right mentality and mindset to things. So I've got a few things in work that at some point maybe we should talk about.
Sure. And is there somewhere online we can go to kind of keep tabs on what you're up to?
Not yet. I do need to probably start thinking about that as well. So I will.
You bet.
I will. Yes, I will. I will be shifting to that kind of a phase here pretty soon, hopefully.
Okay, because when you submit that book to the publishers, which I'd be happy to talk to you about when you're ready, they're the first thing you're going to hear is, okay, what's all the free stuff you're going to do to market this book for us? So you'll.
Oh yes,
that web presence. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for this incredible look at Wernher von Braun and Walt Disney, a truly unexpected tale. Tariq, speaking of which, where can people track your indescribably incredible life?
Well, you can find me at space.com as always, getting ready for the next big mission in space. You can find me on the Twitters at Tariq J Malik. The T stands for Tomorrowland, of course. And I will be looking for my great big beautiful tomorrow at Rocket Lab's Virginia launch. They've set the date for that, January 23rd. I'll be driving down to Virginia to watch that first U.S. launch for Rocket Lab. Thanks.
Wow.
Braggart. And of course, you can always peek at me at pylebooks.com. That's pylebooks.com, or at astromagazine.com. Also on Facebook, Twitter, and occasionally Instagram. Please don't forget to drop us a line at twis@twit.tv. That's TWIS at twit.tv. We welcome your comments, good or bad, suggestions, ideas, insults, you name it. And we answer every email, so don't be shy. You can be amongst the dozens that email us every week. Be sure to join us next week. New episodes published every Friday on your favorite podcatcher. So do make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, give us reviews, give us thumbs up, give us 5 stars, give us a bright new shiny gold star, whatever it is you can do. We appreciate it. And you can always head to our website at twit.tv/twis. Also, don't forget that you can get all the great programming on the TWiT network ad-free on Club TWiT, as well as some extra stuff that's only available there, even from our show, for just $7 per month. And that's less than Twitter's charging for your check mark. So what a deal. You can also follow the TWiT Tech Podcast Network at TWiT on Twitter and on Facebook, and twit.tv on Instagram. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Listeners of this program get an ad-free version if they're members of Club TWiT. $7 a month gives you ad-free versions of all of our shows, plus membership in the Club TWiT Discord, a great clubhouse for TWiT listeners. And finally, the TWiT Plus feed, with shows like Stacy's Book Club, The Untitled Linux Show, The Giz Fizz, and more. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit, and thanks for your support.